Chapter 36 Bicycle Days. Sailboats and steamboats, locomotives, horse cars, and trolley cars, all these had played their part in the development of New York. Now, during the 80s and 90s, a new kind of vehicle carried the city onward still another step. As early as 1877, the high wheel had made its appearance on the streets, and even before that, the old bone shaker was not unknown. But it was not until the coming of the low-wheeled safety that the craze really took hold. Then the influence of tens of thousands of cyclists began to make itself felt with power. Cobblestones gave way to asphalt, along which the endless procession could speed with pleasure, and recreation parks were created far enough away to meet the demand for outings. Bronx, Pelham Bay, Von Cortlandt, and other parks owed much of their planning to the bicycle vogue. And along beautiful new Riverside Drive, on almost any summer evening, a myriad of twinkling headlights moved in a glowing, shifting, dreamy maze. In those days, the Duke of Marlborough, perhaps on courtship bound, was arrested for scorching on his bike, and young Alfred E. Smith won his first popular title of Coaster King. But the city had problems as well as pleasures. A Russian Tsar, Alexander III, began to persecute the Jews in his empire, and thousands of them fled to New York, where they added to the difficulties of the congested districts, particularly on the east side. The problem from over-immigration was already acute, for races had formed the habit of huddling in separate communities, and crowded tenement houses of the dumbbell airshaft design offered a direct challenge to the city's health. In 1879, a mass meeting of citizens in Cooper Union resulted in the formation of the Improved Dwelling Association and the making of sanitary laws. While in Brooklyn, Alfred T. White set a new standard with his home buildings constructed around a central court. Castle Garden had served for a time as an immigrant station, and it was not until 1892 that Ellis Island was purchased and fitted up for the reception of the oncoming wave of foreigners. Perhaps it was the big Brooklyn Bridge that gave the city a greater urge toward permanence and beauty in its buildings. At any rate, the old brownstone fronts began to give way to the chateau type of mansion after the middle of the century, and there was greater enthusiasm for public monuments and edifices. St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue between 50th and 51st Streets was dedicated in 1879 by Cardinal McCloskey, whose father had given so generously to the founding of St. James Cathedral, Brooklyn's first Catholic church. There soon followed the Temple Beth El and the Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. The Architectural League of New York dates from 1881, with Mead, McKim, Tiffany, Lebrun, St. Gaudens, Lafarge, and such other first-rate names among its membership. In the very year that marked the completion of Brooklyn Bridge, 1883, the first Metropolitan Opera House was opened with a brilliant performance of Faust, and a gala benefit was held in the 14th Street Academy of Music to provide a pedestal for the Statue of Liberty enlightening the world, a gift of the people of France to this nation. Then, on November 26th, the centennial of British evacuation was celebrated by placing a statue of Washington, donated by the merchants of New York, on the steps of the Sub-Treasury building, the site of his inauguration as first president under the Constitution of the United States. Another memorial, planned in 1885, was designed to commemorate still another president, whose death stirred the city's deepest emotions. Ulysses S. Grant, under shadow of death, spent his last days painfully writing his memoirs to provide an estate for his wife. For his remains, a small tomb was erected on the banks of the Hudson River. To this site, a mourning cortege, 6 miles in length, bore the body on August 7th, after it had lain in state for 3 days in the draped rotunda of the City Hall. In 1897, the present stately monument, although not completed, was dedicated to his memory. Liberty mounted her pedestal on October 28, 1896. Senator Everett's speech was left unfinished because a premature signal lowered the veiling flag when he had scarcely begun. Through the campaign efforts of the New York World, which had been so active in securing funds for the pedestal, the statue was equipped to shed a radiant electric light through the torch and tiara. Theaters gradually edged their way uptown from the old Rialto on 14th Street, and with this northwesterly movement, the great stock companies of Lester Wallach, Augustin Daly, and the Fromans began to change into the modern star system. The spotlight already had lingered upon Booth and Barrett, Ada Rehan, Modestka and Mansfield, John Drew and Mary Anderson, while across the Atlantic came Bernhardt, Doucet, Henry Irving, Ellen Terry, and other famous players to make New York first in theatrical importance among American cities and establish its prestige as a mecca for foreign talent. On March 11th, 1888, when the clock and suit manufacturers had every right to anticipate a noble spring parade of Fifth Avenue fashionables, the great blizzard struck New York instead, raging furiously for 3 days, tying up business and traffic with its 22 inches of snow and causing acute distress. The Washington Centennial of 1889 was a 3-day jubilee which reenacted the old scenes of Wall Street's federal glory. President Harrison was rowed from Elizabethtown, as Washington had been, in a decorated barge. The ceremonies of the day were made impressive by an ode of Whittier's and a speech of Chauncey Depew, who was then a prominent figure in the financial and political life of the city. Later, the beautiful arch in Washington Square, designed by Stanford White and inspired by the centennial celebration, gave a more lasting expression to New York's reverence for this hero of the past.